We can't yell about that. That's how companies work. They're supposed to maximize shareholder value, and Bitcoin is an amazing shareholder value maximization tool. So why would they not use it? 2011, I mean, he was prescient. He just spelled out this entire thing, what was going to happen, right? If you can borrow in the currency and it's cheaper to borrow than the rate of Bitcoin growth, then that's what you're going to do. You're going to borrow and you're going to buy Bitcoin. Then you have people who think Bitcoin has, lost its way because it's become this corporate thing. Has it though? I mean, it's a peer-to-peer electronic cash. What that means is that it's permissionless. Everybody can buy it. And peers include, corporations, right? They're also people, according at least to US law, that actually had freedom aspects to it. That was really what got me excited, because I came from the Soviet Union where we didn't have any freedom. And when we left, we didn't keep any of our money. If you have Bitcoin, then you have a seed phrase and you put it in your head and you leave the country and you have all of your wealth, right? I actually don't see the sort of eventual complete takeover of Bitcoin and like what you might call true hyper-Bitcoinization, where Bitcoin is the only unit of account. Bretton Woods was, we get all the gold, you guys get all the dollars. Now it's, we get all the Bitcoin, you guys get all the stable coins. I honestly think that's what's happening. I think this is Bretton Woods 2.0.
Before we get started with all the topics, maybe give the viewers and the listeners a little bit of a background of who you are and why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Sure. So my name is Jan. I am the co-founder of Swann Bitcoin and the CTO here. I also wrote the book Inventing Bitcoin, which was written in 2019. And it's a very short intro to how Bitcoin works from a technical level, but also explains, kind of the motivations of Satoshi in creating Bitcoin, as far as I understand them. My history is in startups. I came to the US in 1989 as an immigrant from Ukraine. At that time, it was part of the Soviet Union, and kind of grew up here doing a bunch of startups. Swan is my 7th company now. Kind of been an early engineer, co-founder, run all kinds of things from, technology, operations, risk, security, things of that nature. And I got into Bitcoin, in 2016 fully. I mean, I was definitely had some earlier touch points, 2011, 2013. But 2016 is really when I went down the rabbit hole. I actually read the white paper, even though I'd interacted with Bitcoin earlier, but it took me until 2016 to actually dive into that. Started reading everything about it and really researching the space, which included at that time researching all the blockchain and crypto garbage, which later I realized was garbage, but definitely took me a while to get there. But really, I became excited about Bitcoin because of its monetary aspects. And when I understood that Bitcoin was a new type of money that actually had freedom aspects to it, that was really what got me excited, because I came from the Soviet Union where we didn't have any freedom. And when we left, we didn't keep any of our money. So that was the thing for me that really was the light bulb moment with Bitcoin, and why I thought it was so important to work on it.
Interesting. I love, I hear that sometimes with Bitcoiners that have the background of not having a lot of freedom, and then freedom technology is a lot easier to understand when you first come into Bitcoin. I want to touch on the book Inventing Bitcoin, and I think it's 6 years, 5 years, something like that ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there something that you look back at the book now that you would like to add to the book, and something I have learned that over the last 5-6 years that would be really important to add to the book?
Well, obviously a lot has happened in the Bitcoin space since I wrote it in 2019. I think at that time the market cap was something like $100 billion, and I thought that was already a huge achievement, and was sort of talking about it, in that way. But today, of course, it's 10x that, which is pretty insane to think about. Also, I think I didn't cover enough in the book on energy. I think the energy aspects of mining, which became in the later years a huge talking point in the mainstream media. You had all this energy FUD, Bitcoin's going to melt the planet, all that stuff. I don't think is addressed well in the book, and that's something I would definitely love to go back and add. And I had plans to do it, but I just been so busy with Swan and life and kids and things that I haven't really gotten to it. But I do want to do a whole section on energy usage and why actually Bitcoin is beneficial for the planet, and things like that, which are now becoming more and more mainstream narrative, but was, of course, I think the pivotal moment in 2023, 2024, when that started shifting.
Yeah, it's interesting because when the book came out, 2019, 2020, it was not a talking point at all.
Right.
I remember coming into Bitcoin in 2020, and there was no energy thing whatsoever. It came, I think the first time really, it was 2021 maybe, when Elon Musk kind of bought Bitcoin, and then like 3 weeks later, oh, it uses energy.
Yeah, the Elon pump and dump. Yeah, I neglected to mention it uses a lot of energy. Oops, now I have to sell all of it. And then he actually didn't sell anything because, of course, Tesla and SpaceX still hold a bunch of Bitcoin. And it was all, it's Elon, right? He does random things. He's a random person. I think there's a lot of positives about him, but he is pretty impulsive. So there was some pretty impulsive stuff he did with Bitcoin. And I do think that set off, maybe that was the thing that set off the narrative chain. I'm not sure. But then there was the New York Times story. I think that was probably the biggest. That was probably the peak of the energy FUD. I think that happened in 23, I want to say, when it was the front page of the New York Times of how terrible Bitcoin is. And that article was full of inaccuracies, full of falsehoods, omissions. It was really bad. And the whole industry, I think, at that point coalesced around fighting that. And there's so many things that we put out around that I think started to turn the tide for the general narrative and in the space of like, hey, let's actually recognize what's going on here. This is not, this is nothing new. The New York Times used to love to write about demand response and how that's great. You need things to balance loads and in power plants. And then as soon as it was Bitcoin that was doing that work, it was like, oh no, now all of a sudden it's bad. So complete nonsense. And I'm glad that things are turning around now.
Wasn't it also Ripple? And I think it's Ripple. It was that was funding a lot of the campaign.
Right, because it wasn't Ripple specifically. It was Chris Larsen, who was the founder of Ripple. So it wasn't like Ripple, the corporation, doing it. But he gave $5 million to Greenpeace, which then ran this change the code campaign. I think that was called Change the Code. I don't remember what it was. Where they were essentially saying, we want Bitcoin to change to proof of stake system because it's so bad for the environment. And I remember I spent actually a lot of time on Twitter just like making fun of them the whole time because I was like, look, you want to change the code, go for it. Like, have fun, right? Actually, you don't even have to do any work because somebody already created a fork of Bitcoin. It's called Bitcoin POS. It's a proof of stake Bitcoin. The code is right there. There's no change. There's nothing required. Just go ahead and get people to run that code and we'll be fine. And they just didn't understand even the conceptual futility of trying to run a campaign to change the code. That's not a thing. That's called a hard fork, right? And then when you do that, you just create an altcoin. We've seen that happen over and over in Bitcoin, and it's not ended well for the people trying to make those altcoins. So those $5 million ultimately went to waste. Or perhaps, partially they were responsible for the creation of some really awesome art, like the Skull of Satoshi, which was created by Greenpeace as some sort of attack on Bitcoin, but ultimately became celebrated by Bitcoiners and then was donated. I think it was donated to the Bitcoin magazine, right, by Chris Larsen trying to make peace. So
I literally saw it this year in Las Vegas at Bitcoin 2025 in person for the first time ever. So it's still the meme is still around.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's interesting because they don't get that there's no longer any politics. I think the angle was let's strong arm. The angle usually is with those campaigns, strong arm the CEO, strong arm someone to do actually something. But there's no one you can strong arm into changing the code. You kind of have to make a compelling case of that's why it's actually better to change the code. And if your case is good enough, maybe some people actually adopt the code and actually do those. But just making a negative campaign on Bitcoin, I don't know. This was kind of like a missing mission from the start.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not a cynical person. I honestly think Chris Larsen thought that this was a thing that he could do. I honestly think he didn't understand how Bitcoin worked, and he was like, maybe if I just donate $5 million and make this campaign, maybe we can change Bitcoin. And that's not how Bitcoin works. And there's so much history to that point too, right? Because in 2017. We had the fork wars where people were trying to do the same thing. They were trying to change Bitcoin, right? But they didn't change Bitcoin. They just created a new coin. And even though at that point, the consensus to do that change seemed to be very high, right? There was the New York Agreement, which was a bunch of miners and companies in the space. And it was something like 90% of the hash rate and 80+% of the economic actors in the space came together in one room. And we're we're going to change Bitcoin. We're going to change the block size. And they couldn't do it. And so if you couldn't get that consensus when you had so many, of the sort of what you would think are the decision makers in Bitcoin all agreeing on something and they couldn't do it, That should be probably the end of the conversation, but I guess some people did not read history and are still trying to do it. So
it's also funny when you think about Bitcoin now being a 2.3 or $2.2 trillion asset, and he thought with $5 million he can change the code.
right.
It's kind of
Right.
hilarious. How is actually, I want to get that, because like, how has coming up in the Soviet Union kind of influenced your view on Bitcoin? Because I think like the unique life impacts of people have a view on like how they came to Bitcoin. Because I still think, even though we are getting bigger, the Bitcoiners today are pretty unique people and we're pretty out of the ordinary usually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I came to the U.S. when I was a kid, right? I was about 7 or 8 years old. So a lot of what I know about the Soviet Union isn't really from memory. It's much more from my parents' stories. As a kid in the Soviet Union, I grew up like any other kid. I was running around on the playground, whatever, playing with knives, the things kids do in the Soviet Union. What I did learn after I got into Bitcoin, actually, I knew the stories about shortages, right? I remember actually standing in various lines with my parents, right? There was red lines. There were essentially a completely planned economy in the Soviet Union, so you didn't have proper supply and demand signals in the market, which led to shortages, which is actually something that I later read, the Bitcoin Standard by Seyr, and Seyr talks a lot about that, how money is a transmitter of information, right? And this is a concept for me that was kind of new because I don't have an economics background. I have a technology background. So thinking about money as a transmission mechanism for what the market wants is an interesting way of thinking about it, right? In the Soviet Union, that transmission mechanism was completely severed because it was just the government that would say, okay, we have a 5-year plan. We need to produce this many potatoes and, this much bread. And if you're an engineer, you would actually be told to go and like work on the farm for some period of time to like contribute to society, right? So they were literally planning people's and my dad had to do that. My dad was a civil engineer and he had to go and like work on a farm, right? Just it's total nonsense. So in the Soviet Union, because that was all planned, there were shortages. So number one, we did not have a mechanism for transmitting information in the economy that was, accurate. And the money was essentially like play money, because it was actually the Soviet ruble had a fake exchange rate inside the country that was divorced from its international exchange rate, right? So people were paid fixed salary. So a certain job, it had a certain salary. It wasn't like a market salary. It was like, if you're an engineer, you get paid 500 rubles. And if you're a teacher, you get paid 300 rubles or whatever, right? So people had these fixed salaries, and then the ruble was, usable, but you can only buy whatever's being sold that day. So if there was no bread, you would buy the other thing and you would trade with somebody else. So first of all, the economy, the nature of the money was broken. And I think that's one thing that's interesting about Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is an incorruptible transmission mechanism for monetary information, because you can have a range of let's call it useful transmission mechanisms, right? So on the very low end is something like the Soviet economy, where the ruble isn't the real money because it has no real market value. So it doesn't really, fluctuate. It just has a fixed rate set by the government and everything's planned. So there, the transmission mechanism is completely broken. Then you can have a capitalist economy, like let's say the United States, where we have ostensibly a more or less free market economy. There's supply and demand, and there are of course certain regulations and certain price controls and certain things that make it not a true free market, but it's closer. It's a lot closer to a free market than the Soviet Union. And the dollar is close to a good transmission mechanism, except for it also fluctuates, right? Because we print more of it. So it's like it's a kind of like this elastic band, right? It sort of works, but if it loses tension or has too much tension, it could be a problem. And then on the very, very sort of the perfection end is Bitcoin, right? It's a perfect monetary transmission mechanism. It's not subject to any supply and demand changes in the money itself, so it can perfectly transmit supply and demand information. So if something is worth X amount of Bitcoin, like that's what people are willing to pay for. There's no other thing. It doesn't matter because the Bitcoin supply is not being manipulated. So I think that's one aspect that makes Bitcoin very interesting when you come from an economy that's got a broken money, is that it is a perfect type of money that transmits information perfectly. The other aspect that's interesting is when we left, and again, this is something that I found out after I talked to my parents, after I discovered Bitcoin. So it was, in I was in my mid 30s, age wise. And so like, that's quite a long time to go without understanding what happened with your money when you left the Soviet Union. So I came to my parents and I said, what happened? Because I've been hearing stories that Bitcoin could be this sort of freedom money where it's portable across borders. And I'm now hearing, this is in, I guess, 2017-ish, when I was researching, or 2016. I'm hearing that there's all these problems going on in Cyprus and Iraq and Iran and like all these countries that are having hyperinflation issues and runs on banks and capital controls. So I started talking to my parents about the Soviet Union and what happened there. And they told me that we left the country, the government exchanged $100 per person at like their fixed government exchange rate. And that's all we were able to keep. Otherwise, we would have to use the market exchange rate for our rubles, which is, they're not worth anything. So they essentially gave us $100 per person. We had a four-person family. So we left the Soviet Union with $400 and a few suitcases. And that's when the light bulb was for me, like, oh, like, this is what Bitcoin was made for, right? If you have Bitcoin, then you have a seed phrase and you put it in your head and you leave the country and you have all of your wealth, right? Whatever little you have of it, but something. And so we, because there was capital controls and the government just decides, okay, you can only leave with $400. Imagine how difficult it is to leave a country where you're going to have to start from zero. It's just very few people did it for that reason, right? So I think that's a game changer. And for me, it was really the light bulb moment of why we should get it to Bitcoin, because this changes everything. It changes like people's ability to leave bad regimes, and that ultimately puts the pressure on the regime to be better. And then creates a much more fair interaction between citizens and the government, and not this sort of like totalitarian, you can't leave because we'll take all your money.
It's interesting when you think about the capital controls, and there's China, there's like North Korea, there's like they're pretty controlled states still. But when you look in the West, I think with Bitcoin, and I'm curious what you think about that. Now that Bitcoin is out in the open and Bitcoin is something that you cannot put back, like you cannot just like revert what already happened, will be harder and harder for governments to actually put in place capital control, because you just simply cannot do it anymore. There's like so many possibilities to just take your money, put it in Bitcoin, and just leave. Like,
absolutely,
the sheep get wings. So I don't know. Do you think there's a possibility that we have, like, there is of course like North Korea and many other places in the world where there's capital controls in many ways and forms, but do you think this from here on, because of Bitcoin, the freedom and the capital control, or the inverse of capital control, kind of only grows from here?
I think so. I mean, it's like you can look at China as an example, right? China has had numerous quote unquote bans on Bitcoin. They tried to shut down mining or shut down exchanges or whatever. They also have the great firewall, but we know that everybody pokes holes in that firewall because there's VPNs and things like that. And Bitcoin makes that really easy, right? And we know that there's tons of capital flowing out of China through Bitcoin. Russia, same thing. Like all these places that try to control flows are having a really hard time. And ultimately, because Bitcoin can be exchanged peer to peer on the street, over the internet. I mean, not even on the street. It could be done over the internet, right? You can literally message somebody over a secure channel and just transmit Bitcoin. Who's going to be able to stop that? It's very difficult. So I do think that creates a totally different situation. And we've seen it where if you have a country that's going through a hyperinflationary episode, that Bitcoin purchasing in that country goes up, Bitcoin purchasing in its neighbors goes up. We've seen this in South America, like when Venezuela was having hyperinflation, that every country in South America was buying Bitcoin. So it's definitely an escape valve now, right? Now the question is how many people are actually using it. Is it widespread enough? I think it's very, very early still. So it's not like I think at the very high end, that's probably true. Like some, billionaire in China trying to get capital out of the country has probably figured out how to use Bitcoin. I don't think the everyday person necessarily is doing that. Maybe they are, but I think the flows are still pretty low, just based on how we see, even if you look at like blockchain analytics and how many people have, a substantial amount of Bitcoin in a wallet, it's not that large. So I think it's early days, but I do think it's a very strong lever that people can press. And the more that people get educated on that, and of course, to leave a country is not easy. It's not just about money, obviously. Like you have to upend your whole life. You have to take your whole family with you potentially. There's all sorts of other factors. And in certain cases, there's like people with guns preventing you from leaving. So you can't even leave if it's not even just a money thing, right? Although arguably, if you have enough of the money, you can probably bribe your way out, which is usually how these corrupt regimes work. So it's not like, I don't want to pretend like it solves every problem in the world. It's not fair to say that, but I do think directionally it creates that pressure, and it creates pressure on governments. It strips them of their sort of, you have a brain drain type of thing happening, where the smartest people who are the most capable and understand and recognize this early can actually get their capital out of the country, can manage to find their way out of the country. They're depriving the country of its most valuable resource, which is its people. So that's, to me, why Bitcoin is so awesome and so powerful, because it actually creates that pressure, and we're going to see that play out over time for sure.
So it's basically where if you're not being attractive for those brains and for those capital to come into your country, you will ultimately lose on talent. You will ultimately lose on brain power, and therefore you also will lose on capital, and therefore the country goes to shit.
Right, because like it's not enough to have oil now, right? I mean, oil is just like one ingredient. I mean, the majority of wealth in the world is created by this up here, our brain, right? Right now, like SpaceX, it's building rockets. It's like the major resource is brains, right? So you have to have that, and you have to be able to attract capital too. And both of those things are possible when you have a jurisdiction that's friendly toward, is freedom oriented, is property rights oriented, is allowing people to develop ideas in a free market type of way. And if you have a jurisdiction that's like, you can't leave, we'll take all your money, you can't, then you have North Korea, right? And what have they produced? So it's very, it's pretty black and white on that front. But a lot of countries are going to learn this the hard way, and in states too, right? You're seeing this now where people are sort of drawing the line, like, yes, we embrace Bitcoin. The United States has embraced Bitcoin, at least, they've made some motions in that direction. And some other countries are saying, no, we're going to ban this. We don't want this here. And they're basically just shooting themselves in the foot, where they're saying, we don't want freedom. We don't want, innovation. We don't want capital. Okay, fine. We'll see you in, 25 years and see how you're doing.
Yeah, I hope this doesn't happen with Europe. But
right. I'm sorry. Europe is not headed in a great direction, so I don't know.
I unfortunately agree. Yeah, and I hope like there's either there's this decisions where you either double down on your socialist agenda and you kind of try to control everything in Europe, and you can kind of try to do this, but it just makes the problems worse, because the good people will just leave, and more of the good people leave, the more you double down on those things, or you make a whole reverse. And I see a little bit of like a good signal, because the European Union is doing a lot of the things that we see as bad, and the European Union actually gets a lot of criticisms out of the countries. For example, in Austria, the country that is the political party that is the most critical against the European Union is the strongest one. So I see some positive things in there, but I don't know. I just hope that they're not doing anything too bad in a couple of years, because it can be bad.
I mean, I think, people will talk, people talk is cheap, right? Once you see the effects of your policies, then it's like, they're going to have to reverse, right? At the end of the day, you can only push policy so far until things start to crumble. Then people, at the end of the day, it's like, if it's really, really bad, then there's a revolution. And hopefully, we don't get to that point. But people get upset when their society isn't working, and then you have all kinds of problems. So I do think that's the other pressure, is that, the government can talk, but then they just get voted out of office, or at the end of the day, like a revolution happens, and that's really bad. But that's how things change.
Really cool. The actual question I wanted to start actually today was a different one. You've been really engaged in the Bitcoin community for a very long time. I found interviews with you for 5 years ago, and probably maybe they're like even older than that. So how far has Bitcoin come the last like 5-6 years that you have really closely worked in the Bitcoin ecosystem with Swan, but also like really observed the Bitcoin ecosystem, and how different is the time now? And for the people that have the view of like, oh yeah, like you were 5 years in the Bitcoin and you were early back then, how do you give them perspective of how early we are still today?
Yeah, and just by the way, to be clear, I first bought Bitcoin in 2011, so I didn't know what it was. I bought my first Bitcoin at $30, which is the peak of the 2011 hype bubble, and then it went down to $2, and I sold it or lost it, or I don't remember what happened exactly. But basically, that initial time, I didn't understand Bitcoin at all, right? I just like I read about it for 5 minutes on Slashdot. It said it was an open source payment thing. I was really into open source. I thought it was cool. I bought some and didn't do any research, right? And I think that's the case with most people where they first start. And you could say 2011 was very early, but in 2011, the reason I sold it at $2, because right now it seems like I was a total idiot, right? But in 2011, the perception of Bitcoin was it's an experimental thing built by some random anonymous people that is an open source project. That's the perception. So you could see that when it goes up to $30 and then goes down to $2, which essentially has lost like 90 whatever plus percent of its value, you're like, okay, it's done, it's over, right? I have to exit now because I've been made a fool and I've lost all my money. So when people get into Bitcoin in the earlier years, 2011 and 2013, whatever, they had a certain perception of Bitcoin. And I think since then it's accelerated so dramatically. None of us really expected it to go this fast. I think, well, most of us. There's definitely some hyperboles and people who predicted, I would say, what's happening today early on. But for the most part, it's hard to say that in 2011 anybody had that conviction, or even in 2013. In 2019, when I started or 2016, when I started researching Bitcoin and culminated in me writing the book in 2019, it was also like not entirely clear to me what the hell was going on. I mean, I started when Ethereum was coming out in 2016. And the very first thing I was hit with when I started researching Bitcoin was there's a new Bitcoin and it's called Ethereum and it's much cooler than Bitcoin. It can do programmable money and all that stuff. And I looked at it, and as a software engineer, I was like, oh, this is very cool. I could build a bank in like 100 lines of code. I mean, that's actually pretty mind blowing to a software engineer because building a bank usually takes more than 100 lines of code. So when you see that kind of thing and the promises of that system, they're very exciting. So it took me like a year of blockchain nonsense, maybe like a year and a half of going down that rabbit hole and looking at all the stuff that's going on. It's like kind of like understood what the difference was between Bitcoin and everything else, which was that it was actually truly decentralized. It could actually function as a money. So, you could say that in those days, people still did not widely understand it. And even, I don't consider myself a particularly dumb person. I thought I was pretty smart. And it, even took me, a long time, maybe a year or 2 years to understand really what the point of Bitcoin was and how it worked and why it was different and all that. So I would say even 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 was marked by a lot of conflicting narratives. There was altcoins, there was blockchains, there was all this stuff. People were trying to figure out what the difference was. Then you started having a phase of Bitcoin becoming adopted by sort of, more quote unquote serious people. You started having the first entry of like, professional investors, some early public companies, right? MicroStrategy came in, Square bought some Bitcoin. I think that was in 2020. And I actually have a thread on my Twitter that I put out in 2020, October 2020, which is right around the time, right after the time the strategy had gone in. I think they came in the summer. And my thread is called "When Was It Clear?" It's kind of a parody of a thread by Macro Voices, which was about coronavirus because they called it like Eric Townsend and Macro Voices called how disruptive COVID was going to be and how it was going to shut down the whole world and everything. They called it really early, and kudos to him. So I wrote the same thread about Bitcoin, about 2020. This is the moment. Square just bought $50 million worth of Bitcoin. It's now the second public company to buy Bitcoin. MicroStrategy was the first. This is it. It's happening. It's become normal. Okay. Because that was the pivotal moment. And I did not think even in 2019 that Bitcoin was going to become normal or adopted by public companies or anything like that for like at least 5 to 10 years. That was my thinking at the time, was a 5 to 10 year horizon. I actually, if you look at my early pods, I was always talking about that it's a generational shift. I thought that it was going to be my kids that grew up with Bitcoin as normal that would then grow up 25 years later and be the leaders of Bitcoin adoption. So I always thought it was going to take 25 years. I was totally wrong. It was not my kids. It's actually the old guard. It's actually the boomers and the Gen Xers, and to some degree the elder millennials, where, kind of who I am, that are actually driving Bitcoin adoption, which is interesting. And I didn't expect that. I really didn't. I thought it was going to take 25 years. I thought people's mindset, people have to grow up with something to normalize it. Just like I grew up with the internet. I got my first internet connection in 1993. I grew up on IRC, and I grew up chatting with random strangers on the internet. That was like totally different from the generation that came from before me, right? And I thought the same thing had to happen with Bitcoin, but apparently no. I mean, I think it's happening much faster, and I do think 2020 was a pivotal moment. And what's happened in the last 5 years has been just a dramatically accelerated normalization of Bitcoin, as in companies are buying it, states are buying it. It's an asset. It's thought of as an investment asset. Everybody has exposure to Bitcoin now. It's in the S&P 500. You can't not have exposure to Bitcoin. Sorry. Like, you might hate it, but you've got it, right? So that was totally unexpected. I did not think it was going to happen that fast. And I think it's dramatically accelerated what's to come.
It's super interesting because I actually wrote down the tweet in my notes because I found it really funny, really actually interesting to see. And I just want to read that because it's like literally in October. And you said the purpose of this thread is to document and timestamp when it first became clear that Bitcoin was likely to become a major reserve asset for public corporation. And eventually states with Square's purchase of 50 million in Bitcoin. It's so interesting because now, if a company buys 50 million in Bitcoin, it's not even news. Like,
Nothing.
Nobody cares now if your company buys 50 million Bitcoin. And back then, just like 5 years ago, not even 5 years ago, like 4 and something years ago. It was the biggest news ever. I remember Square doing that, and it was like for weeks in the feeds. Looking back and taking that time step out and just like, getting back in that like early time frame is also 2020 was also the year where I actually came in Bitcoin. So one of my first Bitcoin interviews was actually already with Seyr. Nice. And this is kind of how I came up with all those things. So that's just super interesting to go back in time and revisit that.
Yeah, and so I don't remember. I haven't read the thread in a while. I don't remember what my prediction was, or if I put a timestamp on when it was going to happen. I don't think in 2020 I put that thread out knowing that it was definitely happening. I didn't think that by 2025 we would have like, what do we have, like 200 plus companies now, public companies that own Bitcoin, thousands of private companies, tens of thousands of private companies own Bitcoin. So it's a completely the industry has shifted completely. And anybody who's still thinking, like, there's still the Reddit Buttcoin or whatever, where they're like, when is this Ponzi going to end? Anybody who still thinks that way is just so out of touch. It's just like, it's absurdly to be out of touch that way. It's like your Blockbuster and Netflix came already, and Netflix is already streaming on the internet, and you're like, no, we still have to sell VHS tapes. You're so out of touch. There's just no way, right? It's already become normalized. So it's just going to have to be a little catch-up moment where people are going to say, oh, I guess I missed the news. I didn't realize that Bitcoin is okay now, and now I'm behind. So
what's the story of Bitcoin? Is it that the Reddit thing?
It's a whole Reddit community that just makes fun of Bitcoin. They just like they're literally just salty. Some of them are early Bitcoiners that sold too early. Yeah, it's it's really hilarious. And I think recently there was a thread on there. I just thought, I don't go to this community, but I saw it reposted on Twitter where it was like, when is this Ponzi going to end?
That's crazy.
And they just make fun of all the Bitcoin stories, pretending like they don't matter. And
I've seen Bitcoin sometimes on my, because I go to Bitcoin Reddit or the Bitcoin subreddit sometimes and just see what's going on. And then I see sometimes like screenshots of Bitcoin, but I've never researched it.
I try not to go there because it's just I mean, it will lower your IQ just reading that stuff. Seriously, it's horrible. But it's a bunch of people. Some of them, like I said, some of them were actually early to Bitcoin and then just sold it and just didn't realize what it was, and are still like salty about it. And I guess they cover that with this sort of like negativity about everything that comes out about Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is an amazing, positive, huge. Like I'm an optimistic person. I'm not here to like, melt the world's oceans or whatever. I'm here because I think Bitcoin actually solves energy problems. I think Bitcoin solves freedom problems, right? Like I think if you talk to most Bitcoiners, they're super positive. They're about changing the world. They're about like improving people's lives. And then you have these other people who are like, oh my God, it's a Ponzi. And that's all they do is they yell about it. And what are you doing with your life? Like, go build something, and try to improve society around you. Like, try to improve your own life. Buy some Bitcoin. It's better than yelling about it.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from Coin Vigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey. And the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. I 100% agree. Maybe you're probably the best person to ask the question. How different is this world now? Now we see the treasury companies. We just saw the one tweet where you made, where you basically said like, oh, it marks a major timestamp with like Square buying 50 million Bitcoin. Now we have Strategy buying billions of Bitcoin seemingly every week.
Yeah.
Different is the Bitcoin world now. How can you explain the treasury company side also? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit polarizing, right? Because if you go on Twitter, there's some people who are really, really down on the treasury companies for a variety of reasons, right? Some people are saying it's not good to have so much Bitcoin concentration in companies. We don't want Seyr to own 10% of the Bitcoin supply. That's dangerous. They haven't really quantified what that danger is. I don't know. Maybe it's that Seyr, is no longer the head of strategy, and somebody else comes in and starts selling it. I suppose that could be considered negative, but dude, it's a free market. Like, yeah, people will sell Bitcoin sometimes. That's okay. Then you have people who think Bitcoin has, lost its way because it's become this corporate thing. But has it though? I mean, it's a peer-to-peer electronic cash. What that means is that it's permissionless. Everybody can buy it, and peers include, I'm sorry, corporations, right? They're also people, according at least to U.S. law. They are allowed to buy Bitcoin. You can't dictate who is allowed to use this amazing freedom savings technology. I think it's actually a huge positive, and the reason is that if you believe that Bitcoin has a future as a money, then, and you'll see this, every economist loves to yell and shout that Bitcoin is not money because it's not generally accepted and this and this and that. We know that. I know that, right? I can't go to my neighborhood grocery store and pay in Bitcoin yet, but how are we going to get there? The way you get there is by growing the market cap. It's by increasing adoption worldwide. And if you want, the poor people of Argentina and Venezuela to be able to buy Bitcoin and for it not to lose value, well, then you need the corporations like Strategy buying billions of dollars of it every week. Like, that's how that works, right? You don't get one without the other. You have to have constant demand and constant growth in the market. And that demand is going to come from both large corporations and small holders and mass. Historically, if you look at what's going on, like the small holders are not activated to the level of corporations, right? I mean, Strategy has more resources, and I'm sorry, it's not fair. You could be born on an oil field, or you could be born in the middle of the desert with nothing. That's not fair. It's not fair to anybody, but that's life, right? Strategy has the resources to acquire more Bitcoin than most normal people, and they can do it faster, and that's what they're going to do. And that's their prerogative, and that's their choice, and they're maximizing shareholder value, which is also their legal duty, right? So we can't yell about that. That's how companies work. They're supposed to maximize shareholder value, and Bitcoin is an amazing shareholder value maximization tool. So why would they not use it? And at the same time, I see it as a huge benefit to the other side of the market, the freedom aspect. The acceptability of Bitcoin worldwide depends on this increased demand from these companies, right? The usability of Bitcoin, the financialization of Bitcoin into loan products and things like that. All of those things come from these companies doing what they're doing. So I am a huge believer in that, right? I think it's how the Bitcoin market grows. And it was predicted. I mean, if you look at my favorite article, one of my favorite articles in Bitcoin is Pierre Rochard's Speculative Attack. It's available on NakamotoInstitute.com, I think is the site. 2011. I mean, he was prescient. He just spelled out this entire thing, what was going to happen, right? If you can borrow in the currency and it's cheaper to borrow than the rate of Bitcoin growth, then that's what you're going to do. You're going to borrow and you're going to buy Bitcoin. Well, what are these companies doing? They're doing what he wrote about, right? It's exactly spelled out. The exact nature of the operation was predicted. It was obvious, at least to him. It was not obvious to me. I'm not as smart as Pierre, but he spelled it out, and it's happening. So I think it's really cool. We at Swan have been sort of in the space as well. We started actually right after Seyr came out with this. We started talking about this. How do we make this a service for other companies? And we actually have been marinating this for a long time, and came up with this idea of doing Bitcoin Treasury services, right, for other companies. And we actually have a deal now that's public with Saquon's, where we're actually helping them with their strategy and all that. So I think that's part of how we contribute, is we're trying to create a Bitcoin accumulation machine. I think that's a really important thing to be doing, to contribute to Bitcoin, along with contributing on the other side to self-sovereignty and all that by building self-custody products, by building ways for people to buy Bitcoin and creating that engine, right? I think both of those things need to exist. So for me, the financialization and the corporatization of Bitcoin is just like part of the adoption curve. We always expected the companies to buy Bitcoin. In fact, I think we had our first corporate buyers at Swan like in probably 2020. I think we launched in 2020, and by the end of 2020, we had our first businesses coming to us asking how they could buy Bitcoin. So of course, a business wants Bitcoin. It's great savings technology. It's a great collateral. It's got an amazing property as sort of pristine collateral. It's going to be a game changer for corporations, just like it's a game changer for regular people.
I 100% agree with that. And the speculative attack is an interesting one, because you have on the one and Bitcoin, which always gets stronger the more speculative attacks you do, like the more demand comes in. And on the other hand, you have the US dollar, which just gets diluted along the way. So it's just a matter of time till then the US dollar completely collapses against Bitcoin. I mean, if you look the last 10 years on the price charts of Bitcoin, if you flip that around, it's just like a free fall for the US dollar. But the US dollar is still large and huge. Do you think that it eventually ends up in like there's no a little to no US dollar?
I'm not, this is the part that I struggle with the most. I actually don't see the sort of eventual complete takeover of Bitcoin and like what you might call true hyper Bitcoinization, where Bitcoin is the only unit of account and the only currency in the world. The reason I don't see it is like, I posted a tweet on this recently and it didn't get a lot of engagement. It's kind of strange. How do you deal with war, right? If you look at the history of how countries fund war, it's always through inflation because, they have to print money to create additional resources and fund their military and, create weapons and all that stuff, right? So war is typically funded through debasement of the currency. Realistically, you're not going to collect a war tax. Nobody would consent to a war tax, right? Like, oh yeah, we're going to go bomb Iraq. Let's just all pay extra money. Nobody wants that. So we do it, we do it by just debasing the currency, and then nobody has to worry about it. We just see inflation, and then we can just pretend that the corporations have gotten more greedy this year, and it's not just us printing a ton of dollars, right? So that's how countries now fund war and expansion and all that, right? So then it stands to reason, okay, what happens if a country is the first to adopt the Bitcoin standard? Like, let's pretend the United States buys a bunch of Bitcoin and says, okay, tomorrow we cancel the dollar, everybody has to use Bitcoin. How do they fund war? Now they really do have to do a war tax. And so now you have a problem because a country that hasn't done that and a country that is willing to debase their currency can actually outcompete us on that front, right? And now you have a military problem. So this is the thing that I've struggled with the most. I don't understand how a government would voluntarily put themselves on a non-inflationary money supply that they can't control because they have the problem of funding war. Now, it would be great if all countries simultaneously agreed to do this and ended all wars and we have peace and prosperity, and that would be amazing. But we all know that humans don't work that way. So unfortunately, that's the thing, that the gating factor for me that I have not found a satisfactory answer to. Now, I think the flip side of that, right, is that the country that's willing to debase its currency can only do that so much, right? You can debase and you can start a war, you can debase some more, you can debase some more, and all of a sudden, your currency is worth nothing, your economy is breaking down, you can't really pay your soldiers anymore, and there's some end to that debasement, right? So now, okay, maybe we can give another country can come in and pay those soldiers in Bitcoin instead and say, hey, why don't you defect to our side? And now we have the stronger currency. So there's a reason to have Bitcoin as a reserve currency, right? The United States can have a pot of Bitcoin that grows as other countries debase their currencies, and that becomes sort of like our backstop. We can still use that if we need to, and it makes our currency stronger because it's now become backed by something to some extent, right? Because right now, again, what is the U.S. dollar backed by? It's backed by the flows of the world economy using the dollar as a reserve currency, and that's really what it's backed by. There's no other backing, right? So yeah, I have a hard time seeing the true transformation or letting go of fiat currency entirely. But I do think there's a world where there's a blended option where governments that embrace Bitcoin early are able to build a reserve, and that reserve is actually useful for trade with countries where their currency is, malfunctioning or debasing or whatever. And for those citizens that want to interact and leave or whatever, they have a path, right? So it's a complicated situation. I don't have a clear model in my head for how that would play out. I think it's going to be interesting to see it because it is playing out. We're seeing it now. We're going to see over the next, say 25, 50 years, how countries adopt it and what happens to their currencies, right?
Yeah, this is a hard question, and I also don't have I don't have an opinion on that. I just have a lot of different theories in my head that I'm like, okay, this could happen, and one of them is something where, and for all that to happen, Bitcoin has to be way more mature. Like that's not happening this year. That's not happening next year. I mean, we just talked about that you were not thinking that this will happen faster, and you thought it takes 25 years, and now it happens faster. Maybe I'm also wrong on that, but I think this whole things with counters will take a long time, because Bitcoin has to be way bigger. It has to be way mature. I feel like there will nothing happen before Bitcoin is at least like $100 trillion asset, and way more stable, and just like not a boat, but an aircraft carrier. Like it has to be huge. If it's huge, then there are countries that don't have their own currencies, like El Salvador and many others that use the US dollar right now. So to get out of that, they probably will incorporate a hybrid strategy with like, we have US dollar, we offer like maybe euros, and there's like also this thing with like Bitcoin, and they kind of like maybe slowly adapt it. Like, I mean, El Salvador did it already a little bit. I feel like El Salvador just came to the party way too early. I think they just started that whole thing way too early. And it also surprised me. And so if there's like one country that says like, oh yeah, like actually this Bitcoin thing kind of works, it's stable, people like it, it moves around, and it also like grows in value, and then all of a sudden Bitcoin gets maybe to a state where in one small country, all of a sudden this is the main currency. I think if this happens,
if it has strong protection from its neighbors and doesn't have to worry about military issues, I think that is a possibility.
Yeah, and that's my hope. We have like, okay, there's like one small country around the world that has like, I don't know, like 1-2 million people there, which is where it's like the size is big enough, but also small enough, if you know what I mean. Where like they just do that, and
that could happen.
Then maybe there's some cascading effects from that. I'm not convinced of that theory, but if I have to think about a theory where like how countries have to adopt it, at some point the stronger currency has to take over. And granted, like I think that will just take a long time. Like the corporate adoption is seemingly easy compared to country adoption and what's going on there. I personally think so.
I think so too, and I think your theory is interesting because essentially the way that I see it is I don't see any major world power just being like, okay, no fiat, we're fine, we're good, like because they have the military concerns, right? Most of the other smaller countries, they don't really have military. They're either not worth invading, or they have enough protection from their neighbors, or they have treaties or whatever from the bigger world powers that sort of covers them, right? And if that's the case, there's no reason for them to not try to do a Bitcoin thing. I do think there's an interesting thing happening in the US right now, right? If you look at our overall posture with crypto, stablecoins, Bitcoin, what we appear to be trying to achieve, and I don't even think it's like a kind of an open secret. There was that whole paper put out by the administration. I forgot the name of the guy, but one of the economists in the Trump administration put out the whole paper about like sort of how do we maintain the dollar hegemony and how do we fix all that. And one of the ways they're doing it is by actually actively trying to dollarize the world. They're trying to push stablecoins out into the world, because you previously have this problem where you have the dollar system. Our dollars don't reach everywhere. There's lots of places in the world where people can't get dollars. They don't have access to banking, that kind of thing. There's like shadow dollar systems like the euro dollar and all that sort of plug some of those gaps, but not really, because you can imagine like, sub-Saharan Africa and stuff like that. There's no dollars to be found, right? So people are actually going to use stable coins instead. So we make stable coins legal, prominent, whatever, and then we can sort of turn the other way that they're being used by terrorists and money laundering and all that. Like we can talk about how we hate that stuff, but we actually want to encourage it, because what that does is it creates demand for dollars and indirectly creates demand for treasuries, because the stable coin companies then hold the treasuries, right? So we actually start to replace the current, the petrodollar system, which is what's sort of been a key driver of why the dollar is so prominent, right? Is our deals with Saudi Arabia, and then the injection of the dollar to world oil trade, which then leads to the injection of the dollar into world trade in general, and into dollar denominated debt all over the world, and the whole thing is built on that, right? So as you start to see countries moving away from that, and we've seen the BRICS countries, they don't love the U.S. They don't really want to deal with us. They've talked about creating their own currency, which I think is kind of nonsense, but okay. They wanted to do something else, right? So there's a pressure there where they want to break away from the dollar. They don't want to use the dollar. So we're trying to create the counter pressure where we're saying, okay, you guys don't want to use the dollar, that's fine. But you know what? Your citizens really love the dollar. They would love to save in dollars. So we're just going to push stable coins into every corner of the world, make it really easy for people to access those stable coins. And that creates the dollar demand for us. And over time, that dollarizes all these economies. And so maybe you have countries like El Salvador who are, who want to fight back to that pressure and to say, we don't want to be dollarized. We want to have to control our own destiny. We want to have some sort of Bitcoin backed currency. And they try to fight back, which I think is what you're suggesting, right? Where the smaller countries do something. Maybe that's interesting. Or it could be that we just, like the US just wins. We just push dollars everywhere. And the only thing that exists in the world are basically stablecoin dollars, which everybody has access to. And we have all the Bitcoin, just like what we did with the gold. We did exactly this play with the gold. Bretton Woods was, we get all the gold, you guys get all the dollars. Now it's, we get all the Bitcoin, you guys get all the stable coins. I honestly think that's what's happening. I think this is Bretton Woods 2.0, and that we get the Bitcoin, they get the fake money, and we get infinite demand for our treasuries, which lowers our interest rates, which is also awesome for us. So it's I think that's the play that the U.S. is going for, and it's kind of an insane gambit, but I think it might work. It's a crazy thing.
And it's insane for me that the current sitting US president is talking about Bitcoin, being in Bitcoin conferences. And I don't know how much he understands Bitcoin, but if he understands what you just said, that would be crazy. Like if he gets,
I'm telling you, I don't think he understands it, but I think his economists absolutely understand it. I think I got to find the name of the guy who wrote the paper, but it's essentially what's described in that paper as the economic plan for the Trump administration. It's like, we need to create demand for dollars in this way. I don't remember what he said exactly. I have to pull it up.
Yeah, but that's super interesting because, like, if this is a Bretton Woods 2.0 and we have an absolute dollarization through stable coins, oh gosh, yeah, and it's already happening. Like the US dollar is in 60, 70 countries all across the world. And then with stable coins, you also have all the advantages of not being limited by the traditional banking system, and you can just do it a lot better. So like that would be major, I think.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing, but it's also Steven Mirren is the guy. That's the guy, I'm pretty sure. I just tried to look it up. And Scott Bessent for sure understands this stuff. I mean, these are not stupid people. I mean, I say what you will about Trump, but like the economists surrounding him are not stupid. They understand these things. And that's why there's no other explanation for why the US would go so hard at like embracing stable coins and Bitcoin and stuff like that. It's really, they're trying to normalize it and create the system, right? Because it's not to the benefit of the government to, sort of propagandize or promote freedom money, right? Like, so what they're really trying to promote is stable coins, not so much Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is kind of like an add-on, but it's because we want it, it's part of our treasury holdings. We want it part of our, the country's backstop.
And then there's the next game theory aspect that we just said in the beginning, where if you want as a country to have all the Bitcoin in your country, you also have to get all the Bitcoin companies, all the mining things, and all the big holders of Bitcoin into your country. How do you do that? You make Bitcoin-friendly policies. You make Bitcoin the world, like you make US the Bitcoin capital of the world, I think he said crypto capital of the world. But yeah, anyways, so. Yep. With that, you also get all the Bitcoin in your system, which is kind of a genius thing, making the US friendly to Bitcoin, so that this is the world power where you as a Bitcoiner, you can easily come, you can get the Bitcoin there, you can spend it, and you can store it there. And at that same time, you get all the Bitcoin there and to the rest of the world, because China is not looking good for Bitcoin, Europe is not looking for Bitcoin. They're all getting the dollar. They're all getting the stable coins.
I mean, that's essentially, as I understand, what happened during the first Bretton Woods is that during the war effort, like all these countries spent their gold trying to fight the war. And since we weren't so involved, we had the giant hoard. And so like when they all needed to rebuild, we just said, oh, here's some dollars. We'll let you borrow some dollars. Why don't you use that? and we'll hang on to your gold and you can have it later when you want it. And then we just rug pulled everybody and said, sorry, no more convertibility of dollar to gold. We were just joking about that, and now you get to use just completely unbacked dollars. But by that time, the dollar had become so entrenched that we could just do that. So they can totally do the same story with Bitcoin and stables. Like, it's very easy, and it's actually easier, I would say, because now we actually have this globally interconnected world where all trade, a large portion of trade is happening online. And more will happen online. And then you have AI and like all this. So more of our economy is going online, and more of that economy is going to be flowing through some sort of crypto rails, whether it's Bitcoin or stables or whatever. It just makes sense.
The only aspect where it's different with gold is you don't necessarily have to put an IOU on top of Bitcoin. You can also, if you want to have it faster, like put it on Lightning, put it on other rails. This is the only thing where I might say like it might break down because of that. Just because of like, okay, if you have like why would I buy a currency that's backed by Bitcoin if I can just buy Bitcoin in exchange with that? With gold, with the physical limitations, I totally get you. Like you need to like you cannot rub a gold bar off at the supermarket, or even like gold coins. Like it's not good. But with Bitcoin, even if Bitcoin goes to like, I don't know, 500 million a coin, you can just like spend Satoshis. You can even like theoretically split a Satoshi in like 100 other units or like 1,000 other units. So
that's true. But you also have like, at least in the short term, the Bitcoin is very volatile relative to the dollar. So a lot of people who are saving in like a third world country will probably prefer a stable coin to Bitcoin, or at least for a portion of their savings. Maybe they have some really long-term savings in Bitcoin, but like most of the world doesn't even have long-term savings. We actually have to put this into perspective, right? Most people are living paycheck to paycheck or worse. So they're not really thinking about long-term savings. That's like kind of a luxury concept when you have enough to save. Many people are just, saving a tiny little bit or something, and maybe they prefer to hold it in stables because they're only saving it until next week and they need to pay the bills. So that's to me where I think that pressure is from like an everyday sort of like middle class or lower class perspective, where you're just getting, you got paid $10 this week and you're going to hold it until next week, and you don't want to hold it in your local currency because your local currency will definitely lose value. Bitcoin might gain, might go down, but it's volatile. And then you have dollars, which are pretty stable. So I think that's the reason why people would choose stable coins over Bitcoin. I don't have the math behind this, but I'm pretty sure that I've seen some recent articles actually saying that some of the stable coin flows are bigger than Bitcoin flows in some of these countries. So I have to find the math. But that would make sense to me intuitively, that people would choose dollars when they have short-term liabilities or something like that versus, long-term ability to save.
Yeah, any adoption of Bitcoin as a currency is, for me, you only can do that in a large scale if Bitcoin is stable. Like before that, like Bitcoin has no chance of being a currency against stable coins, just because like stable coins are, I mean, it's in the name.
They're guaranteed to depreciate at a slow rate, but most people don't think about the depreciation. So
that's true. So like that's what I brought up in the previous example. Even a small country adopting it, for me, that can only happen if Bitcoin is 100, 200 trillion and it's kind of stable. It maybe fluctuates like 1-2% a day, and not like, oh yeah, like today it went up 10%. Oh, it went down 13%. I mean, now Bitcoin actually like kind of is a lot more stable than it used to be.
Yeah. And why is it stable? It's because of these freaking treasury companies. That's why it's stable, because they all have like very sophisticated financial operations, holding it within a tight range, making sure that they can do these things, right? There's more, the more financialized it gets, the more stable it gets. And I agree, it has to get a lot bigger, but I don't even know if it needs to be 100 trillion. Maybe it just needs to be like 10 or 20 trillion, and it'll be the size of gold, and gold's pretty stable ish, right? And like, it doesn't take that much. If you add on top of that the fact that gold isn't being used as any sort of treasury asset, and there's no like this insane trading activity that's actually trying to stabilize it with all the hedges that are going on, that I think Bitcoin gets there sooner because it's explicitly designed as an asset that's being financialized. It's a financial asset, and it's being integrated into the traditional financial system, and all of these things that these existing market players are doing, including, just regular market operations, derivatives, like all the stuff that's going on is going to stabilize it at the end of the day. So I think maybe we get there sooner.
Yeah, it's true, because like we are now at 2.5 trillion, or like 2.3, something like that. And if we 10x from here, we are already at gold. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
If gold, like we probably, like if we 10x from here, gold already probably goes up like 5x, like, and then we need to go a little bit higher. I don't know, probably at around 1 million per coin probably is where we actually catch up to gold. Maybe we need 2 million. I don't know. But it's interesting, because if we say, okay, Bitcoin is the new gold, and the stable coins is kind of the new fiat and US dollar, and stable coins are the US dollar, isn't then it's a problem for the US government if there's a corporation holding like 600,000 Bitcoin? Do you think if in that situation, are they just letting that happen, or actually saying like, oh yeah, like it has to be, you get something for that, but like the physical Bitcoin cannot be in your control?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess just the point of that they can then manipulate the price because they have so much of it and they can move the market. Is that kind of the angle?
Yeah, it's just like if the US actually moves forward and saying like, hey, like, and for example, they own a bunch of gold, like. It appears to be that they own a bunch of gold. Like,
we are led to believe. Right.
I've never seen the gold, but yeah, maybe it is there. But let's assume they have.
There are many stories, yes.
And then they want to do the same thing with Bitcoin, but it will be harder and harder for them. How much of the gold supply? I think like 25% is the thing.
I don't know, actually.
I think John F. Kennedy Jr. Talked about that in his speech, that he wants the U.S. to own as many Bitcoin from the circulating supply as they do with gold. And I think he said there that that's why he wants the U.S. to own 4 million Bitcoin, which is like a hell of a lot of Bitcoin.
Wow.
I don't know how they would get there, but they have the money printer. So it's just a question in my mind. Okay, like if we get there and the stable coins is there, what are they doing with all the big US corporations that now accumulate Bitcoin? I was like, yeah, like we have less, like the US right now has less Bitcoin significantly less Bitcoin than a smaller US company.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think there's been speculation that, if the US really wanted to acquire a ton of Bitcoin, they wouldn't just go to the open market, because that would just be crazy. They would just go to Seyr and just try to make a deal for all of Saylor's coins, right? Which is interesting to think about. I mean, I don't know. I guess that could happen, right? And what if they gave it to him, at a guaranteed 25% markup? Like, could he say no from like a shareholder, value maximization perspective? Like, I don't know. That's really interesting, right? Because he would have to present that deal to the board and all that. Of course, I think he controls the board, so maybe it doesn't matter. But it is interesting to think about. I have no idea, but to your point, they do have a money printer, so it's a lot easier for them to just print, $1 trillion. Mint there was like the whole COVID era meme where they were going to mint $1 trillion coin, and all of a sudden that was going to allow them to print $1 trillion. I mean, maybe they can do that, right? I don't know. Maybe that's the easier way to do it, but of course it would completely spike the price of Bitcoin to just infinity. There wouldn't be that many coins on the market, and people would just, knowing that the government wanted them so badly, would not sell them at that price. So I don't know. Then it's a question of like, how extreme does it get? Do they use force? Do they try to nationalize companies? Because personally, I don't think so, because that really undermines the credibility of the United States as jurisdiction, and it kind of kills the whole reason why companies want to be established here, right? And the strong property rights that we do have. So I don't think that happens, even though there's a bunch of, obviously there's Bitcoiners that would argue sort of more on the paranoid side that of course that could happen. 6102 happened and they took all our gold. So why wouldn't they do that again with Bitcoin? They could, I guess. But again, it just undermines the jurisdiction so badly. I just don't see it happening in the modern age.
Which brings me to my overall point. Bitcoin has never been at a better risk reward ratio like right now. It's so obvious, and still we're so early.
Yes.
And it is a great compelling case for self custody, which I also personally really like. So
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
my two main points of like get Bitcoin and put it in self custody like
Yeah.
were confirmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still think this is one of the reasons actually why I always thought it was going to take 25 years, because I think that the technology and the user experience of Bitcoin is still pretty rough. And, you look at the hardware wallets that are out there, they're still kind of made by, I would call them kindly engineers, engineering minded people. They're not really designed for really good usability. Sure, they could be figured out. They're not that complicated. Many people, can sit down and figure it out, but it's just not the kind of thing that most people get comfortable with. So it takes a lot of effort. Like we built a whole multi-sig self-custody thing at Swan called Swan Vault, where we basically try to walk people very, very step by step at the setting up the product. And it's doable, and a lot of people are doing it, but I think we still have a long way to go in improving the hardware wallets of the industry and things like that. So one of the things that I struggle with is I oftentimes parallel what's happening in Bitcoin to what happened with the internet, because if you look at really early internet, I got my first connection in like 1993. And actually before that, I had a modem and I was dialing up BBSs, right? So before, I think starting like 91 or something, 91, 92, I was already connecting to these BBS systems, which are, for the listeners that are younger than me, bulletin board systems. They were like the early, you dial in and you connect to a bunch of people. You can share content. You can even sometimes chat, but they were localized. They were kind of a decentralized system, right? So in those days, you had people that were running what we now think of as like nodes in Bitcoin. You had people running internet nodes, right? They would run a modem pool. You could dial in to this BBS, and the BBS would have some connection to the internet, and they would be able to put content to the BBS from the internet. And that was one way that people got access to the internet without actually having an internet connection, because like in 92, 93, not everybody could get one. It wasn't available everywhere, or it was costly. Sometimes there was hobbyists that would run a internet provider for their neighborhood. They would run this modem pool, or they would run a gateway and other people could connect, or they would run it for their family. And some of those hobbyists became the future ISPs, the internet service providers. They became, the AT&Ts and the Comcasts and all that, or smaller Earthlinks, the smaller versions of those companies. So you had this transition from hobbyists, where the internet was just a bunch of decentralized nodes, to like a small company to megacorp. And now everybody gets their internet from the megacorps. So there is a danger and a possibility that the same thing happens in Bitcoin, where first, in 2009, it's all hobbyists, people running, Node on their computer. And then it's like progressing. Then all these small companies started to come out. So you have these startups and they're running nodes, and now people are connecting to those nodes. So you have like, Ledger and Trezor, they're running nodes. Now, most people using those hardware wallets are not running their own node. They're just connecting to the Trezor and Ledger run nodes, right? And so they're like the small corps running this, right? And then you have the big corps that start to run it, the big exchanges, the Coinbases of the world, right? And now they're running the nodes, right? And then you have same thing happening with Lightning. You started with hobbyists that were going back and forth, and then you have Wallet of Satoshi running the biggest node, and everybody's connecting to there, right? So I think there is a centralizing force that's kind of a natural force, where this technology, yes, it's decentralized, and in the strictest sense of the world, anybody can participate. Like I have a Raspberry Pi, I can run a node, but in practice, most people are not going to run the node because it's too difficult, or, actually keeping like close to 100% uptime on a node is very, very difficult, actually, if you don't know what you're doing. What about your power supply? What about your internet connection? What happens when it goes out? What happens when it runs out of disk space? Most people don't know how to do those things, right? So it causes an effect where most people end up connecting some sort of company to service their needs, whether it's for being a node or for being a wallet provider, or to transact over Lightning. Is it a bad thing? I don't necessarily think it's bad, in the sense that there's enough of them and there's enough decentralization, there's enough things so you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. And of course, you can still do all the things yourself. But I do think there's a force that we have to recognize that is a centralizing force, that most people just don't want to deal with any of this. They just want to press a button and for it to work. And that's not something you're going to overcome with technology. It's like, that's human nature. Most people just want to press a button on their phone and make a phone call. They don't want to run the cellular network. That's a totally different thing. So I think I don't know, but that's just a comment on, yes, I think self-custody is super important. And I think it's either self-custody or collaborative custody. Run your node if you can, if you want to investigate how to run nodes. I think that's really awesome. But I just don't expect most people are going to do it. And that's the challenge to us, the people who are building things in Bitcoin, to try to make it easier that people can do it.
And I like collaborative custody. It's like a nice in between where, depending on how it's set up, but like in most cases, the customer has more keys than the people doing it for them. I know there are other models out there. I don't know how Swan actually does it, but I like the models where the customer has not all, but like most of the keys, the majority keys, so he can move it on his own, and the provider could not move it on their own.
Yeah, we do the same. They have in our system, they have 2 keys. They have like 2 jades, and we have the third one that's more of a backup or a co-spending key. So yeah, we cannot move funds, and that's part of why we otherwise we wouldn't call it self-sovereign. It's only self-sovereign if nobody can stop you from spending, and they can't spend your funds. So those are the 2 definitions for us. We can't stop you, and we can't move them on our own. And that was a key design decision for us. But we also recognize that a lot of people just want to put their coins somewhere that looks more like a bank, where they just don't worry about it. Like, is it fair to say they can't worry about it? I mean, it's still a very early industry, right? Like, there's a lot of things that needs to be figured out. But we're trying to always improve both of those things. That both should be better, over time.
100%. It was such an amazing discussion with you. I loved it a lot. We are already kind of coming to our end of the time. And I have one question to ask each and every one of my first time guests on the show. And the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Well, if you want to meet me on a mountain sometime, I can teach you how to ski.
Have you been skiing in Austria?
I have not been in Austria. I did ski just this last winter in Chamonix, which is sort of close, as somewhat in that vicinity. But yeah, I've been skiing all my life, and I love it. And I've taught a lot of my friends, even in their adult age. So I'm hugely into that.
Awesome. Where is this? Is this in Switzerland or like Italy?
Chamonix is in France. It's on the border with Switzerland.
France. Oh, yeah, okay.
It's like the French-Swiss border.
Amazing, yeah. I haven't been there. Like I don't know.
Oh, it's really, really nice. Yeah, it's beautiful. There's this station called the Guy du Midi. It's like 10,000 feet up from the ground. You just go up like super, super high. You can see the whole world from there, or it seems that way.
Amazing. Really cool. We have an routine, as you know, as you might know from on the podcast, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asks you the question, what would you like to see more of in Bitcoin? And what would you like to see less of in Bitcoin?
Wow. Well, I'll start with the less, because it's really top of mind. Is I would like to see less people just like getting angry at each other on Twitter. It's just not productive. I would like to see more building. I would like to see people building stuff. If they don't like what somebody else is doing, they should build an alternate solution. I think a lot of people right now is a time to build. AI has made it so easy to build new things, or at least explore concepts. And it's almost like an unlimited amount of things that we need in Bitcoin. We need better self-custody solutions. We need better hardware wallets. We need better user experiences for spending over Lightning. We need better everything. So I think that people who are out there kind of yelling about treasury companies or corporate adoption of Bitcoin should hopefully go build something. I think that would be great.
100%. That's very true. Really cool. Thank you so much. More office than just build stuff and less discussion. Yeah, I got that. Thank you so much. Before I let you go, Jan, where can people find you and ask your questions?
You can find me mostly on Twitter or X or whatever you like to call it. My handle is Scoop, SKWP. Pretty responsive there. I'll try to do my best.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Jan. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Robin.
This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.